We're with Mike Boyle, strength conditioning coach, Boston University, Boston Bruins, women's Olympic soccer team, a huge history. But we're going to do something a little different today with Mike. Mike, thanks for joining us.
It is my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Mike, what we want to do is kind of go backwards. We're known as a little bit different kind of company, as we want to talk about Springfield and the match of what you were doing in college to the fact that sports should be a microcosm of life. And the more experiences you have, the more the kids then will be able to have the life skills, the coping skills that will let them pick better choices in their journey.
I would 100% agree with you.
Okay. So when you were at Springfield, there literally was no strength and conditioning program. Are we correct there?
That is correct. I was a physical education major, and the way Springfield worked at that time was if you wanted to be an athletic training major, you had to apply after your freshman year. You had to show them that you had the grades to get in. So I went into athletic training as a sophomore. Strength and conditioning, in truth, wasn't even a thought.
And so this is what we're trying to get to in the books that I've written, in the talks that I give, is that if you have a multitude of activities, experiences in life, as life comes at you, you're going to have a better quiver, a better idea in the back of your head to frame the input that's coming. Does that, so that when you do, go ahead.
I would agree. No, that Springfield was all about it. Springfield in the late 70s, early 80s when I was there, I tell people it was the most amazing education because we were immersed into everything. We took gymnastics, we took swimming and diving, and we took literally a course called water stunts and diving, where in water stunts and diving, you had to dive off the 3-meter board and at least jump off the 5-meter tower to pass the course. You had to swim underwater for distance. There were things that were done that were, physical measurements, track and field. You did all the events. So I think there's no question my success as a strength and conditioning coach relates directly back to my education at Springfield because I was immersed in every single sports that I never played. I had to really learn about it and spend at that time a trimester. We were a trimester. I was really immersing myself in those activities, and I think it was critical to me being able to be in so many different areas in sport. If you look at, I've been most successful in hockey. I've never played in a hockey game in my life. I've been in, I've played pond hockey when I was a little kid. That is the extent of my hockey experience. Yet I've probably worked with some of our greatest players since. I worked with guys in the 80 Olympic team. I worked with Dave Silk right when I first got to BU. So it was one of those things. I met Dr. Mimi Murray, who taught a class called Organization and Administration of Physical Education. And she had coached women's gymnastics and women's volleyball to national championships at Springfield and had played neither sport. And she spoke about that in the class and said, you don't have to you don't have to have played the sport. You have to understand people and coaching. And I think those were kind of the critical early lessons that we got.
Yeah, we say that if you have the basic coaching fundamentals, you should be able to coach any sport through high school.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I would say that. My father, and again, my father was a really successful basketball coach. He played college football. And then at the high school level, I needed a basketball coach, and he ended up winning a couple state championships in Massachusetts as a basketball coach. So, again, I've been in that environment. When I say to people, I've been in that environment my whole life. I really have been in that environment my whole life. I was brought up going to practice, watching my father coach basketball, and then realizing later on that he was coaching a sport that he never really played.
Mike, when you were at Springfield, and again, we want to stress this to our listeners, you didn't have a preconceived notion because the strength and conditioning didn't exist. So just like kids starting to play sports, we're trying to get the parents, we call it the synthesis level of thinking. We want to take two seemingly unrelated things, put them together, and then be able to come up with a conclusion. And when you did that, the journey in itself revealed to you what you wanted to do. Is that correct?
It did. Yep. I started out, I was very lucky. I told this story last night. I did a Zoom session for a bunch of strength coaches last night. I was lucky in the sense that a guy named Mike Wojcik was my dorm director. Mike, if you follow the National Football League, is the longest tenured guy in the history of the NFL. So I think I would say he coached at least 25 years in the NFL, maybe longer. Just retired this year finally from the Cowboys. He actually, up until 2 years ago, he had the most Super Bowl rings of anybody in the NFL. He had 6 rings between New England and Dallas. And Brady just tied him with the last Super Bowl ring. But he was my dorm director. He was the track field event coach. So suddenly I was immersed in this track and field world where they really understood speed and power and strength at a level that the sport people didn't understand. So in some ways, I always call it my Outliers moment, if you've read Outliers, where and they talk a lot about how you just somehow you luckily stumble into the right place. And I really stumbled into the right place at Springfield College.
Yeah, Dr. Mike Maloney gave me the book. He's the director of University Sports Medicine at the U of R Medical Center. And I was struck when I first read the book that I didn't agree with the premise because, like, Sidney Crosby immediately clicked with somebody. John Lennon and Paul McCartney clicked. But what I thought is the theory of it's all about the journey. And we stress that over and over. We've gotten to be such a result-orientated society. It's like the smartphones the kids have today. Well, they're not really smartphones. They're answer phones.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we're confusing knowledge with answers. And that stops the evolution of the journey of the brain, whether it's the amygdala, whether it's hippocampus, whatever's going on there, prefrontal cortex, it's missing or being devalued. And I think then that leads the kids, for the most part, to live and learn and play in fear.
Yeah, I don't know. You know, it's funny. I have kids I have a 15-year-old. I don't. The one thing, have you read Most Likely to Succeed? You'd really like the book. Have you read it?
No, but I'm going to send you a copy of all 3 of my books.
Thank you. That would be great. Most Likely to Succeed is all about the educational system. And one of the things the guy starts out with, he's an educational consultant from Boston, Ted Dintersmith. And he basically says, you'll never be smarter than your phone, so give up trying. And it's more about the idea that because we have basically now we can take the whole card catalog from the library and carry it around with us everywhere we go. It's time to develop different skills. And suddenly the soft skills become much more important because knowledge is easy. Knowledge is no longer at a premium. The ability to memorize things doesn't really matter when you can have the answer in 10 seconds. But that still doesn't mean you're going to be successful. The fact that you've got a phone won't make you a success. The fact that you know how to deal with other people who aren't on their phone is probably what's going to make you a success. But I feel like a lot of us, when we get older, we kind of start sounding like our parents. When it was our parents, we were blaming the radio, and then we blamed the TV, and we blamed music, and we're always blaming some technological advance for the decline of society. And then we usually end up okay in spite of all the technological advance. And I think we'll be fine with phones and computers and everything else as long as we focus in on what's really important, which are the interpersonal skills. I worry that my kids don't read enough, that they don't write enough, that they spend too much time memorizing information. I would just wish school was about reading and writing. Read these books, write about what you think. Read this book, write about what you think, because those are the really critical skills. The book talks about the fact that the only people who use advanced math tend to be either, mathematicians, rocket scientists, or tradespeople. The average person won't use math beyond algebra or geometry. And, I think so. I think in education, we waste a lot of time with kids, and we don't teach them a lot of the things that they really need and that are really important.
Yeah, I taught for 10 years. My wife taught for 12. I'm a huge advocate of play-based education. Our kids read all the time. What we want to go with this, Mike, is that with this, what you said, you want your kids to read more, and the technology has this effect. there's also a paradigm where we seem to be, with this advent of now specialization, trying to get immediate answers, when in actuality, the knowledge comes from, to me, fail, fun, repeat, fail, repeat. And then you get an internal realization instead of the external force telling you what to do. And in that journey, there's where you get the true lasting knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, and there's the whole specialization thing. I mean, that's probably where this conversation is going. But we've got the sports thing completely, utterly wrong, and it gets more wrong and worse by the moment. So that's a massive problem for any of us that are in sort of the education, physical education, strength and conditioning world, because we're being outpaced by the entrepreneurs, unfortunately. So instead of being in a situation where we're dictating policy, the people that are dictating the policy are the people that are trying to make money. And that creates problems.
Yeah, when I spoke for Rick Howard over at the NSCA in Philadelphia, when I talked to the group, I stressed not only is it about balance, but the true art of coaching is relationships. The technical, the power three, the things you do, how you developed it got these athletes, it's still based on trust. And we've lost the value of that, I think.
Oh, I would 100% agree with you. I say that all of the time in terms of when people have asked me, I've done interviews where people have asked me why I've been successful in coaching. Because if you look at me in a lot of ways, I don't look like I don't present as the prototypical successful strength and conditioning coach. I am not large, strong looking. I do not have a beard. I can't lift tremendous amounts of weight. But I've always told them the thing that I can do is I can get people to do what I want them to do. I have the ability to relate to people and to convince them that what I want them to do is really in their best interest and is going to help them. Maybe it's play better, maybe it's play longer, maybe it's get healthy, whatever it is. But that's really the people skill part of the profession is highly underrated.
Yeah, and that's why Mike, that's why Rick had me come down and speak. Let's talk again, stay with this, because I just believe the relationship part. When you have an immediacy is so important. When you have an immediacy need, whether whatever the firing is of the synapses in the brain, when that happens, the cortisol is, the people then get an immediate rush. Dopamine, it was always thought to be a sex chemical, but it's not. It's just a rush. And so if it's true in my research that it's 6 times as easy to go negative as positive, it even becomes more important with our youth today to stress the positive and then balance it with accountability. And I think that the thing has shifted where we let our best players get away with things. We let our best students go without having them help the other students. I don't want to say below them, but that don't have that grade, so that you lift up as a community. And then that, especially in sports, makes the competition better in your team.
Well, the problem that we run into now is that, as you said, our best players aren't accountable because the best players always have an option. In high school, best players, I'll transfer. I'll go to private school. I'll go someplace else. So as a result, coaches coach scared in terms of, I'm just going to let this kid do whatever he wants because I want him to stay here so that my team will win. And it's that way in college now because kids can leave. In basketball, they can leave after a year. In football, they can leave after 2 years. So once again, you can't make players as accountable as you would like to because they have options. And that creates problems. That's why it's funny when you see the authoritarian style of coaching only works in the National Football League where you have non-guaranteed contracts. Other than that, it doesn't work very well. And even there, it doesn't work very well with the superstars because they have options. Somebody else is always going to pick them up. So I think we are clearly losing that accountability.
And it's also, I mean, you worked for the legend Jack Parker. I was head hockey coach at a very small school, University of Rochester, for 21 years. And we used to tell the high school coaches and the junior coaches, don't recommend a player to us if you wouldn't be happy for him and thrilled that he was dating your only daughter. And I think that character essence, whether it's in academics, whether it's in life, is not being stressed. And we've gotten to the point where we're thinking about respect more than trust. And I'm not saying respect's not important, but like the president of the United States, I'm as anti-political as anybody could get, but it's without doubt the toughest job in the world. I have the utmost respect for it, but it doesn't mean I trust that person. When you drive home from work at night, you don't care if it's a Mercedes or a Lamborghini. You trust that guy's or woman's not going to cross the center line. And I think we've lost that balance where the long-term effect, because trust versus respect takes time. Respect is immediate. I demand your respect. It's like, I'm my father's son, I'm my brother's brother. No matter how we do that, it's a reciprocal truth. Wherever there is lightning, there's electricity, but wherever there's electricity, there isn't necessarily lightning. So I think we've lost that connection that makes you who you are. And before you answered, I'm sorry to talk so much because I'm really excited about this, is when you were doing CrossFit before it was even thought of in 2009, before it got to the people. Because if you're doing the basic fundamentals, whether it's sports, life, or academics, you will rise to the top. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I mean, well, one, I don't know if I think we were doing something similar to CrossFit. I'd hate to say we were doing CrossFit. I think we had the idea that multi-joint strength training and interval training and things like that were beneficial for people, but
you had the base.
CrossFit took it to another unfortunate level. So that's one thing. But I think you're right. I mean, when you look at our success at Boston University was very much based on getting good kids and on then having accountability, but it's also based on managing those tougher kids, the kids that aren't the kids, our teams as years rolled on, our teams were primarily made up of these superstar kids who maybe hadn't been coached as hard as they should have been, hadn't been pushed as hard as they should have been, and getting into a situation where you learn how to relate to those kids, how to push that kid, because for us, and it was easy in some ways, it was all about the NHL. Right? Everybody on our team wanted to play in the NHL, and there was almost an assumption that, if you were good at BU, you were going to go on and have a good, long NHL career. So it got easy, but we had to kind of, at the same time, corral some of these kids in the beginning because they hadn't been made as accountable as they might have been in other settings.
It's so much what I want to talk about. Is that there's a two-part to that, though. There's also that kid coming in, if you have the environment set of character, of accountability, of reliability, and I go down to the basics, Mike, of manners. On our bus, when we gave the meal money on the road, if everybody didn't say thank you, we stopped, got back on the bus, and did it again. The idea of accountability, manners, appreciation, if that is embedded, when things get difficult, life, academics, sports, these are the guys and women that rise to the top. As I told my buddy Bob Bigelow, we call it shock absorber coaching.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. Coach Parker, I mean, we had a great culture, and Coach Parker got better with culture as time went on. Because again, I think when I first got there, he was the old school authoritarian. It was a very kind of the old fear-based system. We're going to skate you if you don't do what we want you to do. And gradually over time, we adapted to a very different system in terms of where we were much more worried about. I think you get into sort of a process versus outcome thing.
Yes.
And
Can you expand on that?
We were worried about, I think if you worry about your process, you'll get the outcome that you want. If you worry about the outcome, you'll destroy your process sometimes. There's a really good John Gordon book called You Win in the Locker Room First that he wrote with Mike Smith, who was the GM then of the Atlanta Falcons, or the head coach. I forget which one, but it was basically about the idea that, at some point they got focused on outcome versus process, and he lost his job. And he's very open about the fact that the reason that happened is because he started to make compromises, and he started, the outcome. They wanted the outcome. They wanted to win the Super Bowl. And when they put that outcome primary, it was like with us at university, we wanted to win the national championship every year we were there. Of course we did. But there was a process to doing that in terms of kind of, learning how to play the game, learning how to train, like you said, all of the accountability things. And the one thing that we did tremendously well at Boston University, and that Coach Parker gave me the power to make people accountable. And that's something that I think a lot of head coaches don't do, either with their assistants or with their strength and conditioning people, even with their athletic trainers. You have to have, we used to tell our guys all the time, there's one set of rules all the time, which means you can't be late for practice, you can't be late for lifting, you can't be late for the training room, you can't be late. It's the same rule, and it doesn't matter. It's not, don't be late for a tutor. Don't be late for anybody who set a time to meet with you. And those were all things. And I mean, we held our kids' feet to the fire. We really did. We made, our guys knew that being late was going to be a major problem for them. And, doing your work, completing your work. Hey, here's the workout. There was never, oh, I don't really want to do this. I don't like this. We had some guys early on. Well, I don't really like lifting. And my response was, I don't really care. You don't have to actually, you don't even have to like lifting at all. You just have to do lifting. You got to come in here every day and you got to do it. And you got to do it to the best of your ability. And if you tell me after 4 years you hate it and you're never doing it again and you didn't like it, then I won't worry about it. But I think you'll get better and you'll realize that it was a big part of what you do. And it did. Like, you look at our guys, we have so many guys now that are coaches, so many guys that are working still in the NHL after their careers were over. And I think a big part of that was because we taught culture, and we taught culture by immersion in the process and by not simply focusing on the outcomes. Coach Parker, I can remember one game we played Lowell, and he played 3 lines. He put a whole line of guys in the stands. He said, you guys don't want to play, so we'll just play with 9 forwards. And our guys were shocked because some of our best players were in stands for that game. And he was happy. He said, I can't wait till the reporters ask him why they didn't play. He said, because I'm going to make it clear that it was a coach's decision and it was not an injury. And they had to go and explain to the writers why they weren't playing in the game. And the basic reason they weren't playing was because they weren't playing hard enough. And he said, if you don't want to play hard enough, then we'll play 3 lines and you guys can watch. But he would do things. I used to say to people, he was so bold in the sense that he was willing to lose to win, which I don't think enough coaches are. I think so many coaches are afraid of that one loss that they compromise their culture. And we never did that. We were not afraid, we might lose a game if this guy. He benched almost everybody that ever played at BU at some point during their career. John Cullen, I've talked to him, he's our all-time leading scorer at BU, was a 100-point guy in the NHL, played in the All-Star game. He got benched. It's probably his junior year. Same thing, not playing enough. Finds himself out of the lineup watching a game. So the creation of culture is very, very difficult. But as I said, it's more difficult now that kids have more options. When you've got kids who, if you discipline them, I'm going to go sign with my pro team. I'm going to leave school. That makes it a lot more difficult. And in hockey, it's very difficult because kids can do it mid-year. Kid can just walk out on you in the middle of the season and go basically sign a contract and go to the minors and try to work their way up to an NHL team. So it makes coaching gets more difficult every year because of these things.
Yeah, we were losing to Mercyhurst 13-2, and I ended up playing just 9 guys for the third period. And we were riding home on the bus. We graduated 31 doctors and lawyers and 28 engineers in my career there. We were riding home on the bus, and you get a specific bus driver after a while. And I went back to Bark, and 24 out of the 25 guys were studying. So I went back to the front of the bus and said, boy, I got nothing. Because they get it, we'll get around this. We're going to be okay. And it was. So what I did is Tuesday, that we always gave Monday off. We were one of the first teams. Every Monday they had off. And we took 4 weeks off at Christmas because I wanted them hungry and I wanted them to get great grades. But we skated Tuesday. I sat in the bucket, didn't say anything, gave them a water break for a half hour, and then left and brought, as I was leaving the rink, I had them deliver 4 sheet pizzas Didn't yell at him, didn't bark at him, didn't say anything. Just had the guy deliver the 4 pizzas to the team. Here you go, boys. You got to be accountable. You got to have your own inner drive to do this. And yeah, they had I didn't know this until after I retired. They had in one of the fraternities, they had a calendar every year on how long it would take me to bench every player. And the calendar never went past January. Okay. All right, Mike, I want to talk about kids.
Okay.
How early? Well, I'm make my first controversial statement to you. I think 10 and under should always be equal play. I've spoken 20 times to USA Hockey. I think it should be equal play, U.S. Soccer, U.S. Lacrosse. I believe 10 and under should be all about development. I've said this for 40 years I've been doing this, because the ability of a child to comprehend what they're doing in the sport and all the decisions they have to make should be way more important than the outcome. Again, what we're talking about here is the journey.
I disagree with you. It should be 14 and under. I am horrified when I see coaches shorten the bench in a U14 game, or whatever it is, a bantam game now, I guess. Horrified. I think you should be fired. USA Hockey should tell you you can't coach anymore. You should be forced to play every kid that's on your roster on a regular rotating basis, and the closest thing you should be able to do is change on the next whistle. But I think 10 and below, if it was me, if I'm running it, 10 and below would be buzzer. You wouldn't even get to coach. All you do is open the door. Be like, okay, the buzzer goes off, change them up, throw another bunch of kids out there. We've made such a disastrous mess out of youth sport that it's sad. And the idea that we have to tell a coach that 10 and under should be a situation where everybody gets equal play, like the fact that we have to make that statement is almost the definition of the absurdity that we are living in.
Yeah, puberty changes everything. I agree with you. It should be 14 or under, but I keep getting yelled at, so I moved it down to 10 to hopefully that I would get at least.
Good. I don't care about getting yelled at. I go to those USA Hockey things and I tell them exactly what I think, and I don't even care, because, and I'll tell them that if you do it the other way, you're an idiot, and I'll say idiot, and I don't have a problem with it, because it's an embarrassment. I mean, whenever people, special teams, power plays. This is absurd. The same thing. It should be outlawed. Hey, and the one good thing in Massachusetts, in the league that my son plays in, that's how they do it. Up to 14, it's equal play, and there's no power plays. There's no penalty kills. If you're on when the penalty comes up, then you stay on. You get a chance in the power play. And I don't have any idea why it should be any other way. How is a kid going to learn what I've done? My son, I think, is going to end up being a pretty good hockey player when it's all said and done. And I think part of the reason he's going to be good is because I've never tried to force him on teams that he wasn't ready to play on. So he's always been one of the better players on his team, but he hasn't always been on real good teams. But now, like you said, puberty, he went from 5'3" to 5'11". Now he's 15 years old. He's 5'11". He's 165 pounds. And he's got real good hands and a real good sense of the game. And you think, hey, maybe he's going to be a good player. My daughter was an outstanding player. Played at Clarkson, won a national championship her freshman year, transferred to Robert Morris, was second in the nation in power play goals this year in Division I. But girls are totally different. She was playing up at U12. We asked that she be able to play U14, and they allowed her to do that. So I think that's one of the things you've got to realize, is that there's clearly some gender differences, but there should be no difference from a playing time perspective, because you give a kid, you destroy their sense of worth, because you say to them, you're not good enough. You should never say to a kid at that age that they're not good enough. And even if you don't say the words, kids are smart. They get it. Hey, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough for the power play. I'm not good enough for the penalty kill. I'm not good enough for the third period. Those kind of messages last forever. And it's very, very difficult for a kid to overcome getting those messages at an early age. Because if someone tells you you're not good enough often enough, as you said, the negative, right? You start to believe I'm not good enough. You don't have that instinct yet to think, I'm going to prove that person wrong. You just look at it and think, oh, this adult thinks I'm not good enough. They must be right.
Right. And my point to the coaches in all the sports that I speak at is that this idea of you, and they learn 75% from modeling, in one ear, out the other. But what you do, many of them will never recover. And I don't want to blow that out of proportion from that. But my point being is, when you are involved with these kids, if you put your ego first, I came up with the expression, the joystick coaching, in 2009, where I was working with some soccer people, and they were driving me crazy. And I said, they're not remote controlled objects. They're not miniature adults. They're not micro professional athletes. They're not attached to your joystick, your ego. Stop. Just let them play. And so this one organization gave me one group, and they ended up doing great. When I coached youth baseball, they did all, they do all the 1, 2, 3, 4 things, and they measure them. I said, keep everybody, just give me the kids you don't want. That's it. Just give me the kids you don't want. Who cares? And we'll do well. And what I'm hoping that my audience gets through from you is that as this journey goes, there are certain steps that these children will then not only hold on to, but we're seeing kids now that went through this, Mike, that are now coaching their kids the same way that they got coached. And it's a disaster.
Oh, without question. I mean, I see. Pop Warner football is the worst example. I watch Pop Warner football practices in the summer, in August, in these dirty parks, and there's a bunch of Bill Belichick wannabes out there with their hooded sweatshirts on with the sleeves cut off, screaming and yelling at these children who shouldn't even be playing a full head contact sport at that age. And they're being coached by these absolute idiots who have no idea what they're doing. I have a great clip from Friday Night Tykes, which is a sad television show that was on for a while, showing some of the behavior. And there's just a lot of abhorrent behavior, and it's youth hockey, and it's Pop Warner football, and it's, soccer. It's everywhere. The good thing is we haven't cornered the market because everybody's doing it. And it's bad. I was in England, and they were talking about the fact that they're recruiting academy kids at 9. And I thought, wow. I said to the guy, Des, that I was doing the talk for, I was like, Des, you guys are worse than us. I didn't think anyone was worse than us. I said, but you guys are worse. You got kids at 9 years old trying to decide, do I want to go to Arsenal Academy, or do I want to go to Crystal Palace, or, who am I going to go and sign with? And they have geographical things, like it's based on how far your house is from each individual club. And I mean, completely absurd. And the fact that, especially with the boys, that you could try to project pre-puberty, it's stupid. Because even in hockey, a lot of times that kid, that top U14 kid, is generally just a early maturing kid. And the smaller kid, and that's where you alluded to like a Crosby. Crosby or Eichel, or those kids, they're like the anti-outliers because they're October and September birth dates. But they were kids who always basically played against kids at least a half a year older than them and excelled. Your best players, and one of the things, you probably looked at this, but if you haven't looked at it, your best, most elite people tend to be in the last quartile of the year, not the first. The larger percentage, based on the Outliers book, a larger percentage of a team will be in that January, February, March period. The superstars will be October, November, December.
I agreed with that part of the book.
Eichel, Larry Bird, a lot of those guys will fall. LeBron. I had a whole list of guys. I forget who else was on the list, but there's a lot of guys on that list that fall into that last quartile. So there's just a lot. And the one thing, the thing that comes out of it at the end is that parents should just realize that, okay, if you're not an expert on this, then try to find a real expert and get some really good advice and listen to the advice. That's going to make a really big difference for you. And the thing I always say, the biggest problem with parents is that parents understand how to be good at something, particularly successful parents, which is when you start looking at hockey and lacrosse and soccer and some of these, the parents tend to be relatively higher socioeconomic achievers. And they tend to have focused on something to be successful, whether it's being a doctor, being a lawyer, owning a business, whatever it is. And as a result, they don't understand that child development is the polar opposite of that. They just want to apply what worked for them in their adult life to their child. And it very much goes back to the idea of, if you had a child that was brilliant, you wouldn't send him to medical school. But that a lot of these parents want to do, advancing the kid past where they actually should be, based on their developmental capability, their emotional ability to understand. That's why I said failure is a much bigger deal at 8 or 9 years old, particularly when you're failing and you're disappointing your parents or you're being embarrassed in front of your friends. These things are catastrophic, life-changing events for children.
Yeah, we use the analogy of and I'm going to send you my Pop Warner video. Pop Warner gave me an hour, and we had to sign and do all these things. And we got rid of all the coaches and the parents. I brought in a volleyball and a soccer ball player to coach. And we did this mini documentary and showed how it went to school. Well, people in Canada used to have sex to have their kid 9 months just to get right at they did studies on it, of how the people did purposely.
I have friends who were in track and field who did it. We're very focused on having a January baby.
Mike, with
my son is December 23rd, so I'm definitely not any good at that.
Mike, the kids, as they're going through this process, I want the audience to understand that not only are there long-term ramifications, but they see the other kids playing it. And we use the analogy that it's a race that doesn't exist. It's almost like you take the thoroughbreds at the Kentucky Derby, and now you have the kid, like you said, who's genetically ahead a little bit, has a little bit eye-hand coordination, he or she, and you actually put them out ahead of the gate. No one would ever do that in a race. No one would say, okay, you want to put the best horse out here. And then these kids get to the point where not only don't they get benched, but they don't have the team concept. You could speak to with the women's national team. Everybody's great on that. But what they lose is the ability to bring the other kids up with them and have that inter-team competition, which is truly the only thing the coach can control.
Right. And what you end up doing even worse now is that you try to group groups of those kids together to produce a super team that has a series of non-competitive games against other inferior opponents, and you further perpetuate that. And my feeling too is that if you get a kid who's never lost, that kid's going to really struggle when they do. So when you're one of these parents who's putting the super team together when your kid's 9 or 10 years old, and I love these people. We're going to win the brick tournament. We're going to win the Quebec Pee Wee tournament. And I look at them and think, who cares? And if you do, that's a problem. If you're trying to put a team together for that type of situation, you should probably go see a counselor and figure out what's wrong with you, because it is so developmentally inappropriate. And it just shows when you look at it, there's a reason that, and again, you've probably studied it, there's a lot of early succeeder research. The early succeeders in Canada, I think they had like an 80% dropout rate.
I don't know the number, but it's very close. I don't remember the number. Yes.
High. And those kids tend to drop out because of parental pressure and because it's not fun anymore. And it's difficult. You go into a situation where, you've got to remember that these are children and it's a game. We should be thinking about those. Got all these people who are there competing against other parents for stature instead of looking at it and saying what they should be competing on. And you alluded to it at the beginning. Can I raise a really good human being? That should be the goal. Every coach's goal should be, can I raise some really good human beings? Can I produce some people who are going to be really good functioning members of society and that their sport experience will help that. If you do that, you've done a really good job. And then if your kid ends up being good, and I always say to people, I'm the classic sports parent. My daughter got a full scholarship to college. I was not unhappy. And if my son ends up getting a scholarship to college, I will not be unhappy. But I will never have had that as my goal. I've never raised my children with the idea that I want them to get a scholarship. I told my daughter when I knew my daughter was going to be a scholarship kid when she was 12. And she had a scholarship right after her 14th birthday. She had already been offered a scholarship. But I told her, you can go anywhere you want and I'll pay.
Can we stop right there and qualify to the people, please, Mike? Because this is one of the things we talk about with the CYO to Kiwanis, Rotaries, churches, YMCA. She got offered a scholarship at that age, but the scholarship is not valued until she graduates from her junior year. She gets the number from the NCAA. You pay the fee, and then the letter of intent can disappear. Like Harbaugh's getting all sorts of trouble for it in Michigan. I spoke out in Michigan 2 years ago, where he gives the guys the offer and then he takes them away. And I'm not picking on him, but can you please enumerate to the people that you don't get that scholarship as a sophomore in high school? There are certain requirements you have to go through, and then your senior year, then there's the grant and aid signature and that.
Right. And I mean, you have to maintain a grade point average. You have to be admitted to the university. There are all these things. And depending, I don't know what Harbaugh is doing, there are some character issues. The one thing you realize now, because of early recruiting, is that, I mean, the coaches that do that renege, generally that's going to hurt them in the long run, because people are going to use that against them down the road and say, hey, this guy, yeah, he's offering you right now, but he reneged on so-and-so. And, you know, he reneged on this guy. And unless they had really good reason to do that, if the reasoning was just that those kids weren't good enough, then that's a problem. But, yeah, you're not, like, you don't get a scholarship. You basically get a verbal commitment from the school that they're going to honor that as long as you hold up your end of the bargain. It's much the same like when kids will commit to the Ivy League. You're committing to
athletic scholarships there.
And you commit to the process of admission. They can still deny you. You can say, hey, I committed to Harvard. And then Harvard could come to you and say, we didn't get you in. And that happens.
And your daughter, again, I can't stress this enough to the people, because I hear the scholarship talk. I played one game at Clarkson when Jerry York was the coach there. I had 6 concussions before I went there. I got 2 in a week. I went there with 20/10 vision and left with 2300 vision. The non-head count sports, football, basketball, gymnastics, they're either all or nothing. But the equivalency sports, it's very unusual that one child will get a full athletic scholarship. Like baseball, you have to give 25% must out of the 27. But with your daughter or other kids, so the parents understand, academics, character, all these things play in part. So they could get 50 for the athletics and another 50 through grants, through other kind of aid, correct? It's not always with these. It's very, matter of fact, blunt, it's very unusual that outside of head count sports, a child gets a full athletic scholarship.
It is unusual. And women's hockey is one where they do. It's one of the few: women's hockey, women's basketball, men's hockey, men's basketball, football. And if you look at lacrosse, like my son is a better lacrosse than hockey player, but in lacrosse, it's unusual to get more than 25%.
Correct.
And as you said, and that's the same way, baseball, it's unusual to get more than 50. It's unusual to be a full scholarship player. But the point to me is that shouldn't be the goal anyway. That should be, kind of a gravy thing, and it should be a situation, hey, if your kid gets some money to go to school because they're good at a sport, great. And in much the same way, if your kid is good enough to be able to attempt to play professionally, that's great. But you've got to see the big picture in the beginning. Because if you don't see this sort of character picture that we're talking about, then you may produce a life failure in the process of producing an athletic success. And I think that would be the worst type of failing.
There's 77 times more non-athletic scholarships than athletic scholarships. Like at the Division III level, you could actually get more money where they don't have athletic scholarships than you would athletically for Division I. Correct statement?
Correct statement. Well, it's funny. Someone had said you'd be much better off spending your money on tutors than you did on sports.
99% of the people will spend more on their child's journey than they will get back in payment.
Oh, yeah. Yep, I would say, I don't know that to be factual, but I would say you're 100% correct. Because I see it here all the time in New England. The number of people that spend massive amounts of money, particularly hockey is the big one out here. People spend massive amounts of money in hockey. We have people that play 2 years of junior to go to a Division III school. And that is crazy when you look at that and think extra $10,000 or so a year per year for 2 more years, and then go and pay the full price for your kid to go to school. I mean, but that's what it's come down to. Even the Division III schools sometimes in New England aren't taking kids right out of high school. They want a kid to go and play in some junior league for a year and to mature. Because again, with them, it's the same thing. Everybody's trying to win. And if you can get a kid to do it, I guess as a coach, why not try? It's becoming pretty standard. The only kids who get scholarships now in hockey at 18 are the real blue chip kids. If you look at a lot of teams are playing with kids with 20-year-old freshmen who've already played 2 years of junior hockey.
Yeah, we had 24-year-olds on our team at Clarkson. Again, I'm old, back in the day. Mike, on this, again, the scholarship venue. The scholarships, now the NCAA made a rule change where you could do it for more than 1 year, but it's very few and far between, mostly the Power Five. But in this context, it's only a year-to-year scholarship. And I believe it's July 31st. I'd have to relook it up. But that coach can remove that scholarship.
But that's actually not true in the sense that they have to show cause.
Right, but I'm saying it's not a guaranteed 4 years.
It's not a guarantee for 4 years, but it should be a guarantee for 4 years. If you're at a reputable school in a reputable program, yes, it should be guaranteed for 4 years unless there is an academic issue or a behavioral issue. Those are when people will tend to be able to remove kids. I can tell you that in probably 20 some odd seasons at BU, I think we had 4 instances where we basically asked kids not to come back and technically did not renew those kids. But that's really 1 kid every 5 years. And in every case, actually in almost every case, there was one that was not, but in almost every case, it was a behavioral issue where kids were not doing what they were supposed to do.
Okay, let me grab on that then. Again, because I'm trying to, we do a program, we mentor coaches, organizations, parents, but we're trying to tell people just what you said there. It's once every 5 years, but that wasn't by accident. BU was, we keep telling these coaches when they pick their teams, don't pick the best players. I want the gangly kid at 10. I don't want the little speedster who never passes the ball. But BU didn't have that problem because BU made it a priority not to have that problem. Is that clear to the audience?
Yeah, I would say so. But sometimes we did just go with the best player. I won't say there weren't times where we didn't take the best player, and maybe knowing that best player could be or might be problematic at some point. But I also think in team sports settings, I think you look at your mix and you ask yourself, and I think you see this at the professional level, how much sort of disruption can your culture handle? Because elite players are going to be, by their nature, harder to manage, I think, the great ones, because they don't learn, again, because they don't have a lot of rules growing up. They don't have the same amount of discipline that some other players have because they're allowed to do things. They get away with more. So I think sometimes when you're going to have a team of elite players, you may have to do some character development during the course of that time, and that's part of the deal. I think that's part of coaching. You're going to say, if I'm going to, like you said, Kentucky Derby, if I'm going to train thoroughbreds, then I'm going to expect there to be some issues with those people.
Right. I should have said it differently. We didn't want your best player unless that kid was a good kid. I understand BU with that, and it's, I mean, you guys were at a much higher level than we are. But what I want to say is, for 90% of these coaches, when they're picking these kids, picking the best players and not understanding the development level of the players that aren't that good, that can even out in youth sports through high school, and does. Our research, 5,000 kids, only 10% of all the kids, and I don't even like this word, are the best at 10 are the best at 18. But so what I meant is, they get hung up on that best player, and it affects the culture of their team. We like to say community. And then when that happens, then they look around and they lose that game they should win, or they lose the tournament, and they see the disruption coming, especially from the parents in the stands. And that has a lasting effect on the children.
Yeah, there's no question. I think one thing you should do too is you should be recruiting a lot of times based on parents and looking and thinking, okay, because honestly, I believe that.
We did that. I'm not laughing because I agree. We did it.
Yeah, there have been situations where people have said, hey, I'm not going near that kid because of the parent.
I did it.
Yeah. No, I believe it.
We had a power play. Our power play was great. And I always say in the power play, I can practice it and it's great. I cannot practice it and it's terrible. I don't get the whole thing, but we had a really good power play, and we needed a left-handed shot on the right side for the one time. And this kid was fantastic. So I snuck in a rink because I had a bad feeling about him, in the back behind the rink, because when you recruit enough, you know the Zamboni drivers and stuff. And so I tipped him, and so he let me peek through the door. 30 seconds later, the other team scored on him, and he rammed his kid into the boards. And he was my number one recruit, and I told his coach, and I told our athletic director, that's it, you can't play for us. It's over. We can't have that. And what I think is, these parents, then coaches, allow that, and then they're confused when these kids are problems 5-10 years down the road. And that's what really bothers me, and what we try to talk about, is that we're disabling these kids by enabling them.
Right. And that was where I said Coach Parker was the best at that, in terms of, he did not, and even if we took a kid like that who maybe had a little bit of that in him, we would not, that was not tolerated. Once the kid got there, he was very much, he always talked about playing the game right. He always talked about doing the next right thing. He always talked about, about discipline, about composure. And these were things that he expected. And as I said, I think maybe we may have brought some kids in who maybe weren't that way coming in. But I think sometimes, too, a good culture makes kids that way. Kids get shown very early on, okay, and I read it somewhere when someone said, you've got a great culture, when players say, that's not how we do it here. And it's not coaches saying that's not how we do it here. And that's how our culture was. So our guys were really good about, looking at a guy and being like, that's not how we do it here. That's not going to work, particularly with younger guys coming in. There was no way that a freshman was going to come in and start to dictate how things were going to be done. That was not a possibility in our culture, no matter how good you are. Instead, what happened was those freshmen came in, and even then, like, I'll give you a great example. We brought Keith Kachuk in, who was a big overweight kid, great player. And he got in and saw our culture, and it was just like, hey, we just told him, Keith, you got to get in shape. You got to lose 20 pounds. And he looked around, he looked at everybody else, and he realized, I got to get in shape. I got to lose 20 pounds. And Coach Parker used to always tease me. He said, unfortunately, we did too good a job because he only stayed for 1 year. He made the Olympic team after that year. And, kind of the rest is history. But it was that ability to immerse a kid in a really successful culture and have them look around and think, like, okay, this is how it's done. And I thought we had a tremendous amount of that the whole time. When I look at, we had guys like, Mike Sullivan, was a player for us. Jay Pandolfo, Joe Sacco, guys who were really, being really successful in the National Hockey League. And they were always guys, like, people looked and thought, hey, this is the way it's done. This is the way workouts are. This is how everybody conducts themselves. There was very little tolerance within the group for people who were not willing to do what was necessary.
We met with our captains after every recruit left and sat down. And does he fit? Does he fit? We were going to play Mercyhurst, and we were taking lunch, and I never sat with the kids. We finished lunch, and the waitress came over and said, the manager would like to speak to you. And I said, great. I said, what'd they do? And she laughed. And she said, no, I went into the manager's room, and she said, I've been doing this for 12 years. We've never had a team behave that well at lunch. 2 people went out to our bus driver and told us. From there, we went to the library, and then we upset the number 14th team in the country. And I tell people, there's no coincidence. That's all connected. And I think we miss, like, half the kids I recruited, I watched them walk off the bus and talk to the parents. They were done. If you didn't fit our program, getting off the bus the right way, talking to the parents the right way, we didn't want you. And I think that is so important for youth sports to gravitate back to, of having that team feeling. It's community, Mike. It's
having a character emphasis, I think, is what you're really talking about in terms of. I had a situation with a player one time where he talked badly to his father in front of me, a younger kid, and I looked at him and I said, "Say you're sorry." And the dad looked at me, kind of glared at me that I was disciplining his kid, and then was kind of stuck in the middle because he realized, oh, Mike just stuck up for me when I didn't really stick up for myself. And now I'm about to say something to Mike in defense of my kid, who's a smartass. And he stopped. He didn't say anything. And the kid looked at his dad and said, sorry. He'd asked for money. I remember he said, Dad, give me $2. And I looked at him and I said, your father is not an ATM. I said, ask him nicely for $2. And the dad was horrified that I would speak to his kid that way, except I wanted to look at him and think, you need to speak to your kid that way. Because he said, I'm not putting up with it. And I do it all the time. I have no problem with that with kids. I'll tell kids, the younger kids that are around, if they misbehave. I had a great player, a kid who was actually player of the year in Massachusetts this year. And he spoke poorly to one of our coaches. And I screamed at him right in the middle of the weight room. I said, that's completely unacceptable. Say you're sorry. And he proceeded to say he was sorry. And then he proceeded to come up to me afterwards and apologize. And I looked at him and I said, you're better than that. I don't expect that from you. And
I'm all for giving second and third chances, but not based on talent, Mike. Not based on talent.
Exactly. I agree, but they're kids. And I think our job is to provide a positive environment and to show them the right way. That's what we should be doing. And again, as coaches, we are not generally doing that. We are not providing positive examples. We are not providing positive environments. Like you said, we go back to the unequal play thing. I mean, I'm just horrified when I see that, even at the U14 level, that guys are short shifting kids or benching kids. It's like I just don't understand how you can have such a short-term vision of athletics to think that winning that game matters enough.
BodyByBoyle.com. Mike is on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle?
I am mboyle1959 on Twitter, and I am Michael_Boyle1959 on Instagram.
Mike, we want to thank you for having. We'll send you. I ran out of copies. They doubled the price of my first book, so we found you a copy last night. We're going to send you a copy of our first book paperback. The other 2 books, Molly will send them to you. We'd like to talk to you again if you have the time and if you enjoyed this hour.
Very much enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I got to get back to work, though.
Thank you, Mike. Oh, well, before you go, one last thing. We're 3, 2, 1. I like your scenery behind your house, the woods. Here's ours.
Let me see. Can I see? I can't see your video. Click video on for you.
Oh, dear.
All you should have to do is click your little camera. Your camera should have a line through it. If you click it, the line should go away, and I should be able to see you. There we go. Oh, wow. What's that? What do we got out there?
We'd love to host you. We're truly, Mike, we're a very small company trying to make a big difference. We're looking for a hand up, not a handout.
Where are you?
60 miles east of Buffalo, 10 miles north of Rochester, New York, right on the shore of Lake Ontario.
Wow. Beautiful.
I'm very fortunate, very blessed. I got a great wife, 2 great kids. I'm very thankful.
I'm in the same boat. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
All right. Bye.